Acha ji, Assalamu alaikum everyone. So today's author and speaker really doesn't need any introduction, but because it is convention, I will begin with an introduction, which will most definitely be an incomplete and imperfect introduction. So then I will also invite Dr. Rahman to add a few things to that profile of his. Um, but as you know, this is the second book talk in the Ideas Book Talk series. And Dr. Tariq Rahman here is a renowned scholar and academic, currently serving as the Dean of the School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, as well as the acting Dean of the School of Education at the Beaconhouse National University in Lahore. He has made significant contributions to the linguistic history of the Muslims of South Asia, and he has authored several noteworthy books, amongst which are Language and Politics in Pakistan from 1996, Language, Ideology and Power from 2002, and From Hindi to Urdu 2011. Throughout his career, Dr. Rahman has held a distinguished position at the Quaid-i-Azam University's National Institute of Pakistan Studies, where he served for a major portion of his life. In recognition of his exceptional work, he was honored with the status of Professor Emeritus in 2010. Additionally, the Higher Education Commission bestowed upon him the esteemed title of Distinguished National Professor in 2004, and he has also received notable accolades such as the Pride of Performance Award and the Sitara-i-Imtiaz. So please do join me in welcoming Dr. Tariq Rahman today, who is going to be talking about his latest book right here, which is called Pakistan's Wars, an Alternative History, published by Folio Books. Unfortunately, we were not able to get a bookstall for today, which is typically what we would like to do, so that you can have your copy of your book actually signed by the author. But hopefully there will be other occasions for that. I'm just going to begin very briefly with a summary of his book, and then we can move on slowly into the details. So, Dr. Rahman, in his book, studies the wars that Pakistan has fought over the years with India as well as other non state actors. So, this is a very interesting and a very thorough historical sweep beginning from 1947, focusing on the first Kashmir War and then the wars of 65 and 71, the 1999 Kargil War, which and then like I said, other wars that the state has also conducted with non-state actors. The book analyzes the elite decision making which leads to these conflicts and tries to understand how Pakistan got involved in these in the first place. The author applies what he refers to as the gambling model to provide insights into the dysfunctional worldview, risk taking behavior, and other behavioral patterns of the decision makers which precipitate these wars and highlight their effects on India Pakistan relations for the future. The book also brings to the fore the experience of widows, children, common soldiers, displaced civilians, and villagers living near borders in the form of interviews to understand the subaltern perspective. So, there is much in this book about a bottom up history as well of Pakistan's wars. A nuanced and accessible military history of Pakistan, this book will be indispensable to scholars and researchers of military history, defense, and strategic studies, international relations, political studies, war and conflict studies, and South Asian studies. And if I may add, as Dr. Rahman himself says, it will be extremely accessible and important for the decision makers themselves if they care to consult it. So, with that, I would like to invite Dr. Rahman to say perhaps a few more words if
Yes.
you'd like to add about the book, its conceptualization,
Right.
organization, and with an emphasis on what you refer to as an alternative history.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. First, I'd like to thank you for that introduction. Okay, about the book. Well, it's in, see, the subtitle, An Alternative History, is because of several reasons. One of them is it is the normal histories of wars are about battles, actually. They are military histories in the sense of being about battles. And this is not about battles. This is about decision making which led to wars and also the effects of those wars upon people. That's one. Secondly, the official history in textbooks and otherwise in Pakistan is that either there was a glossed over, or else on the 6th of September, India attacked Pakistan without going into anything else that Pakistan might have done. Thirdly, even if the textbook treats a war as fought by Pakistan, it is referred to as if it's a war launched by the state as a state, and the government acting de facto as government and legally also as government. My contention is that all these wars have been begun by what I call small groups or cliques, generally of officers, military officers, army officers rather, but sometimes, or the first war, of civilians also. So that is a different contention from saying that they were acting, it's the state of Pakistan acting. It might be the president, but it is still not the state. It's not done in the manner in which states act. That is one point which I'd like to emphasize. So in that way, it's not the normal history, it's an alternative history, alternative to other histories which have been written about these wars. And there are several, of course. One of the best histories of 1965 is by General Mahmud Ahmed. It's an excellent history. It's a history of battles mostly, but it's a very good history. It's not really a history of decision making as such, although he refers to it, but it's not that. Then military officers have written about mostly battles and what they have done and what other people have done. General Niazi has written about it, General Musa has written about it, a number of people have written about it. Okay. Then Farooq Bajwa has written his PhD thesis on 1965, and once again it's an excellent thesis, but it's about the foreign policy aspects of the 1965 war, the international aspect, so to speak. So it's not that there are not a number of books, there are, but with the emphasis upon decision making as such, decision making by a clique, another one, and the effects upon people, that aspect is different. And that is why I call it an alternative history. Now, basically, if you look at chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, then that is about the, actual decisions leading to wars. No analysis of battles, once again, actual decision leading. What were the effects on the people? 9 and 10, chapters 9 and 10. And this is about what happened to women and about men because it's based upon gender. Now, let me tell you the sources I've used. I've used 109 personal interviews of people. Then there are interviews by other people. There are diaries, memoirs, fiction based upon real life, and other documents and about wars, both from India and from Pakistan. Some I have referred to the United States, etc., when they have mentioned Pakistan's wars, but otherwise mostly India and Pakistan, or rather Pakistan and India, and Bangladesh. I've been there twice. Unfortunately, I went for other purposes. In the first one, when I went, it was 1994, and it was to write my book, to research my book, Language and Politics in Pakistan. And then I went again in 2013, and both times I took interviews of many people, but it just so happens that almost all of them were published when I came to writing this book. So I didn't refer to my interviews, I referred to the people, those who had published them. One or two are left, and those I have referred to. Why I have called it the gambling model, and that is because I believe that the decision making has been too risky. It's been by cliques, it's been too risky. Of course, all wars are risky, and that, of course, is true. But sometimes, from the calculus of the military strength, economic strength, etc., one feels that this may be perhaps a much greater risk to take than a certain other risks. And therefore, I feel that this was why the gambling model? Because I feel that the risk is, it's not explained through rational calculus. What is it explained then by? What other calculus is there? Personally, I believe that it is ideology, a cognitive map of reality, which is in fact a wrong map. Within that map is that India is a civilizational foe, which is different from being an enemy for some other reason. I mean, France and Germany have been fighting for hundreds of years, but they're not civilizational foes. Foes for a time, yes, but not civilizational foes. Civilizational foes have to be, so to speak, wiped out, as it were, or dominated. But this is, and they're not reconcilable. That is the situation in people's minds. The other one is that the Pakistani soldier is better than the Indian one, the Hindu will take a few blows and, jang khedni hundi zananiyan di. That, in fact, is wrong. Why the earlier generation believed in it is passes belief, because they had fought with officers, Sikh officers and Hindu officers and all that. And the number of prizes for bravery, etc., is not very different. So why they believed in this, one doesn't know. Now, of course, through all these 70 years of propaganda, this is what people feel. So senior officers have written about it. And then there is that Kashmir must be won. So this is where, this is the ideology which leads to, in my view, irrational decision making.
Thank you so much. That's a very succinct sort of explanation of what the book's overall framing is, right? So, Dr. Rahman, that takes me to a very important question about this kind of ideology and what you refer to as the military mind.
Yes.
Do you think that this is unique to Pakistan? And I think you negate that question yourself. So you raise it yourself and then you say, well, it's not unique to Pakistan. You also draw upon certain such assumptions and irrational calculations on the part of other militaries, particularly the Indian military. But then what you add to the Pakistani picture is what really goes to the heart of your thesis, which is to say that when you have this kind of cognitive map or institutional culture, where it is a military clique for the large part making these decisions, then they're being made within a context of authoritarianism, where there's lack of civilian control over the military and what you refer to as a dysfunctional democracy. So could you elaborate on how Pakistan and India perhaps differ in terms of how these decisions are taken and their outcomes?
Okay. Take the 1962 China War, China-India War. The decision making by Nehru, civilian, was based upon General Kaul's assumptions and Krishna Menon's assumptions. General Kaul said that forward policy is fine, sir, and we move forward and the Chinese are not going to do a thing about it. That sort of thing, bluff military sort of feeling. I've got this conversation from different places, Indian officers writing about this. The fact is that it didn't happen. The Chinese moved forward, and finally, India was defeated, really. It's the Chinese stopped themselves because they said, yes, this is enough. After that, General Kaul was removed, Krishna Menon was removed, and Nehru corrected the course. He said, this is where democracy comes in. One other same kind of example. 1971. Indira Gandhi, apparently in April, Indira Gandhi called a meeting and in which the cabinet was there, other people were there, etc., important people. And she got the army chief there, General Manekshaw. And General Manekshaw reports this, by the way. He was saying this in a in a college, educational institution. So it is possible that the field marshal was showing off a bit, but nevertheless, this is what he says. He says that the Prime Minister ordered me to cross the border. And I said, but Madam Prime Minister, this means war with Pakistan. And she said, yes, well, so? So he says, Madam Prime Minister, in that case, you should choose a different commander-in-chief. I will not be able to do it for the reason that the monsoons are going to burst and the tanks will get bogged down. I will do it, however, if you allow me till November, the end of November. I'll give you a victory. And Indira Gandhi said, all right. It is also said somewhere that, in fact, Indira Gandhi had deliberately brought him in to make the others who were hawks quiet, because here is the army chief saying this. So whatever the reason, Indira Gandhi did want to cut Pakistan to size, but she chose a more democratic way in which there was a broader base, and it was government which was acting, not a clique. So this is the main difference. As far as risk-taking is concerned, yes, the military has, despite the fact, and this is very strange, that the first thing you were taught in the military academy is do not underestimate the enemy. First thing you're taught as a cadet. But you're also taught, along with it, optimism. Now, I mean, optimism is fine. If this was half, I mean, I would say optimism is fine for anyone of us, but not for a general. Because if you are a captain or a colonel, that's fine. I mean, you must take orders and do whatever you're ordered to do. So if you say beforehand, look, this is impossible, you're not going to do it. But for a general, you have to look at the weakest link in the chain. And that means that you should not be optimistic, you should be actually pessimistic about it. In fact, that doesn't happen. Because the marshals, when the Soviet Union was about to attack, march into Kabul, the first Afghan War, the marshal said 14 days. It'll take 14 days for us to quell Afghanistan. Absolute, nonsense. Similarly, the latest in the, when did this war start? The Ukraine one, 2020 was it? Anyway, whenever it did, 2021 or whatever, it was March. Now, in the March, the river swells up. The river Dnieper swells up because the snow is melting. You really can't cross the huge river unless you pay a great cost, because people are going to keep firing at you. The assumption was that the Ukrainians are not going to fire back. So we're going to build the bridge and cross over. But this didn't happen. They were bogged down for quite some time, lost many soldiers. Once again, this was probably military decision making, although it is possible that some civilians are audited, but what they say is that it was probably the generals who were over optimistic. So it does happen, but they have to be reined in, so to speak. The military culture in Pakistan has always had, as other cultures in other countries, but the crucial point is what you brought out, that the wars are not examined after that. One assumption, if you use non-state actors, it will work. It didn't work in 1948, 49. From 47, the tribesmen were brought in, and it's the testimony comes from no less a source than Mr. Jinnah himself. And Cunningham has reported it in his diary and elsewhere too. So Jinnah knew what was happening. Liaquat Ali Khan knew what was happening. One other minister says he knew what was happening. The commander of the army, General Gracie, was not told, although he knew, he wasn't told. So there was once again a clique. This time, Akbar Khan has written a book, Raiders in Kashmir, in which he has actually written how many raiders he took, etc. And the fact that General Messervi actually gave him the guns. All this is written by our people. So, I mean, our generals, etc. This strategy didn't work. By the way, Azad Kashmir was not won by these people. That was mostly local people who fought against the Maharaja's army, And Gilgit also, the whole thing. Major Brown is famous for it. So those were won by rebellions here. People who genuinely didn't want the Maharaja to keep ruling. So that is very different from the raiders. The raiders went to they wanted to go up to Srinagar, but were held back, and their path is littered with rape and murder and so on. So one is not a little part, yes, but otherwise, what is Azad Kashmir was genuinely won over by local effort. And therefore, Pakistan has a moral right over it. India has, by the way, a legal right over Kashmir, which Pakistan does not accept because the Maharaja had acceded for whatever reason. He was threatened, so he did accede to it. India no longer has a moral right to Kashmir from 88 onwards, 1988 onwards, because now they are trying their best to suppress the voice of the Kashmiris. That's a moral right, not a legal right. So Pakistan had a moral right to this Kashmir, and India had a legal right at that time to that Kashmir, etc. But India no longer has in my opinion, a moral right to it, and the reports of Indian atrocities are legion, and I have quoted from them. But the Pakistani contention that it was illegal to begin with, that is incorrect. Moral, yes. Legal, no.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that Kashmir really plays a huge part
Yes,
in this story
yes.
because the common thread running through most of these wars, minus you could say 71, is Kashmir.
Yes.
And so that brings me to an interesting observation that you also made earlier that perhaps with the exception of the 47-48 Kashmir War, every other war, the decision to enter into it has been made by a clique primarily of military officials.
That is
But
right.
if we're looking at 47-48,
Yeah.
I would imagine that at that time, these sorts of narratives are already present. So when you talk about India being a civilizational foe, talking about irrational hatred for India, talking about Kashmir belonging to Pakistan, two-nation theory, Islam being the only force against disintegration, Pakistanis being better fighters, all of that. A lot of these are sort of psychological tropes, and but the one that is an exception, perhaps, is this military antipathy to civilian interference in matters of war, in decision making, and to civilian supremacy in general. So, would you say that the conduct of the first Kashmir War in 47-48 and its consequences were really a turning point in how then decision making happened later on and how this whole notion of civilians not being competent to deal with matters of war came about?
Absolutely. As actually, the Kashmir War, one of the major consequences of it was that their officers have written their names here in this book. General Akbar Khan is just one of them, and there are others also, who then reached this conclusion that civilians are not competent to rule, that somehow we should have continued fighting, and they stopped us when we were winning, which was not true. That was what they thought. That pattern asserted itself and remains to this day. So it certainly started with the peacemaking in 1949. And I suppose that was the greatest harm of that war. But the other pattern which I talked about, using proxies, that persisted. It happened in 1965 without announcement and without saying that we are going to war, etc., the way the states do, etc. Plausible deniability was maintained. Kargil, once again. So, and of course, then throughout the attacks on India, etc., from here, all this kept going on. The training of Afghans to take on the forces of the Soviet Union, etc., that too. And in fact, the training began much earlier than Ziaul Haq. Mr. Bhutto's government first trained the Afghans, Hekmatyar, among them, to go and fight the Kabul regime. Not a huge kind of thing, but a small adventure to needle. Needle is the word used actually. The people there, the authorities there. Ziaul Haq's days, of course, it became a full-fledged, huge action on which a military officer himself, who was directing it, has written about it. He's written a book on it, and he has General Yusuf, Brigadier Yusuf. Brigadier Yusuf has written a book on it, and the bear trap. And he's written exactly how it was done. He has given even the proportion of arms and ammunition given to different people. And he says that, yes, we gave more arms and ammunition to Hikmat-yar and others, Islamist groups, although this was based on purely military reasons, but we did give them more arms. That he has written clearly in his book, and I've quoted that. So, yes, that pattern has been repeated again and again.
Thank you, Ji. And so, coming to this really central question of lessons not being learned,
Yes.
history moving on a kind of a loop, because interestingly, you do mention that the 49 or 48 plan in Kashmir is repeated in 65,
Yes.
and then again after a very long gap in the Kargil War. And perhaps if you can talk a bit more about these blind spots that seem to be persisting, and you've already indicated that perhaps those are now undergoing some kind of a flux or evolution. But what are those blind spots, and can we actually see those blind spots being tackled a little more forcefully and directly now?
Right. Okay. Now about the 65 one. Once again, because as I said, it's a clique which is taking this section. So not even the whole army, high command is in favor of this 1965 action. Here is something which I have written between. This is General Mitta who is writing it. He says between 1956 and 1960, at least 4 files recommending that we should attack Kashmir and stating that Kashmiris would rise in revolt were sent to me by the chief for my views. Captain Gohar Ayub, who was the chief's ADC, used to bring the files to me. Every time my answer was a definite no, and the chief always accepted my advice. In view of this, I have not been able to understand how he was persuaded to agree to Operation Gibraltar, which was to send people across, military personnel, in order to go and hold large parts of the Indian side of Kashmir, and to make the Indians over there, to make the Kashmiris rise in revolt. So there were two operations, Operation Nusrat, and the second one was Operation Gibraltar. Well, one can only what made Ayub do this? Because General Musa, who was the commander-in-chief of the army, he has written that he was against it in 2 of his books, memoirs. And then he was interviewed in Staff College. An officer who was there told me about it, which I have quoted. He said in the Staff College also that he was against it. He signed the order in the end, all right. But Ayub must have pressurized him, whatever. He signed the order, all right. But here is the commander-in-chief, here is General Mitta. The high command is saying this was wrong, and they profess not to know why it happened. My own theory is that it happened because of the run of Kutch incident, in which Ayub thought that the Pakistan army had done so much better than the Indian army that perhaps it would do better in Kashmir also. And that was probably the reason. Some people say that maybe that in those days there was the Hazrat Bal incident in Kashmir, and the Kashmiris were angry with the Indian government. So maybe Ayub thought that, or someone he was misled, he thought that this would be a full-fledged revolt. It didn't happen that way. But nevertheless, this is clear that there is another action which they contemplated besides Operation Gibraltar and Operation Nusrat. This was the operation in, the actual full assault on Akhnur, Grand Slam. Because the problem with Grand Slam was that this involved actually transgression against the international border. There's a place called the Chicken's Neck, and if you look at the map, you find that you have to cross this, you have to cross the international border. Another strange and inexplicable thing is, this had been going on, this operation had been going on for a long time, July onwards. In fact, June onwards. This is September, and India had not actually done enough to hold Akhnur against a possible attack from Pakistan. They hadn't. Another seemingly strange thing is that both Pakistan and India, they had signed a treaty, not a treaty really, an agreement. They had signed an agreement that they will keep the main army away from the border areas, and they both adhered to it. Right till the 6th of September, they adhered to this, and on the 6th of September, when troops were rushed in from both Pakistan and India, both had not eaten or slept for the last 24 hours. Very strange, but there it is. It's a myth. People say in Pakistan that Pakistan was not prepared, the troops were not sent over there. That's not entirely true. That is true for Pakistan, but that's also true for India. A third one is that the Akhnur, not that only that Akhnur was not prepared, but that the commander-in-chief of the Indian army was not prepared to attack. Even when Akhnur was threatened, it was Lal Bahadur Shastri who ordered him to do so. It was Lal Bahadur Shastri who ordered him to do so. And of course, I've read a book by an Indian general who says how it was that they had aimed, because of Akhnur, they had aimed at Sialkot and Lahore as a defensive measure. So, I mean, that's why one would say that the 6th of September was India's Defense Day. Anyway, but that's how it is. So all these things were 65, but it was a gamble of the highest kind. But nevertheless, it was. Just one thing, if you allow me to. I mean, here are people who say that, many people who say that Kashmir, 65 was either a victory or something in between, where here is General Mahmood Ahmad. This is what he says about it. He says, in the case of Pakistan, if it was the solution of Kashmir, then we failed. General Mahmood is saying that. If it was merely to defreeze the issue, then the means employed and the risks taken were grossly disproportionate to the results achieved. In the case of Indians, if their aim was to save IHK by attacking Pakistan, they succeeded, but at a cost disproportionate to their gains. If their aim was to capture Sialkot, Lahore, or Kasur, then they too failed. If their aim was to cut down the Pakistani armed forces, attrition, then the Indians also suffered as much as Pakistanis did. So that's General Mahmood. And by the way, once again, the examination of these wars, since it doesn't go on, General Mahmood's book is not very well known. I have never seen a civilian college or university student referring to it. It is in the GHQ, it is in the NDU, but they might be reading it. But it was very difficult to get this book, although it's in fact the best analysis of the battles, at least. It's a very good analysis and balanced. It's a very good book. And it's written by Lieutenant General, and yet it is not available. Nobody knows about it.
Thank you so much, Ji. So I just wanted to actually illuminate something here. When you're talking about gambling, there was one example that was very striking to me, just for the benefit of the audience, and I think this is to do with the first Afghan War, where you're citing one of the intelligence reports, which is saying a hillside in Islamabad next to a mosque contained enough hidden explosives to blow up the capital.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if the Soviet Union knew about it. I think you seem to suggest that they deliberately did not take this action, but it just brings out for you the kind of gamble and risk-taking which is going on.
Yes. Agent who uses these words. And the CIA agent says that, we will go gung-ho. We are going to humiliate the Soviet Union. And there are people who feel that this is going a bit too much, the Soviet Union can do things to Pakistan. So in that context, he writes that the Soviet Union has already blinked. in this war, because they could take off. If they did this, if I was there, says the CIA agent, I would burn the Karachi port and I would blow up this hill, and then I would see what would happen. Since they haven't done it, they will not do it now. So that means we should go ahead and keep doing what we were doing. And General Yusuf, Brigadier Yusuf, he says that we, in fact, even the CIA agent was alarmed, and the CIA said, don't start a third world war at least, because we went deep into Afghanistan, which was not even required, but we did that. And so, in a sense, I mean, bravery, of course, that's certainly there, but look at the risk. So they did that. And further, the Americans brought, they themselves said so, they brought fighters from all over the Muslim world, jihadis mostly, who were not satisfied with their own governments. They brought them here, they trained them, of course, to humiliate the Soviet Union. But of course, then they stayed on. And they stayed on, and their ideology stayed on. My last book, incidentally, is about those kinds of ideologies, let's call them, interpretations, let's call them. It's called, Jihad, it's just called Interpretations of Jihad in South Asia. And it looks at the way, I have given no interpretation myself because I'm not an alim, but I have given a history, an intellectual history of other people's interpretations. That book is still available. Oxford University Press published it here. De Gruyter published it in Germany. So the interpretations are, I mean, if you don't know, even if you know enough, they are valid interpretations in their own right. You can interpret something in some other way, but you can interpret it in that way also. For instance, you see, there is an ayah which says that one must fight till fitna is wiped out. Right? Fitna is wiped out. Now, fitna is, how is it interpreted? The interpretation depends upon the person interpreting it. One interpretation is that fitna was that phase in which the Muslims were being attacked by the Quraysh. They were being thrown out of their homes. Now that is no longer there, so the fitna is finished. The other one is that, no, further, if Muslims are being attacked and thrown out of their homes elsewhere, then that too is fitna, and so one can take on a jihad over there, temporary jihad. A third one is that fitna is actually kufr itself. If it is unbelief itself, the unbelief is not finished, and therefore fitna has not been wiped out, and therefore jihad is going on. A fourth one is that there should be God's rule over God's earth. And since that is not there, all rule other than that of God, or people who work according to what God has said, therefore that is fitna, and therefore that must be wiped out. In other words, you come, and it is not that you can easily say this is not valid and that one is. It is difficult to say that. So, because literally what fitna means is, of course, the melting point, or some great anguish, some great flare up, some great trouble. That is fitna. But that's only the literal meaning. Metaphorically, you have to use everything metaphorically. Allahu Samad. How do you translate that? In certain, if you look at the Urdu translations earlier, it was Allah Beniyaz hai. But Beniyaz, one meaning of Beniyaz is indifferent. The other meaning is istaghna hai. That means does not need things from others, but has got everything himself. So which meaning are you going to choose? If you choose that first meaning, Beniyaz, meaning indifferent, then that means you shouldn't pray. But if you choose the other meaning, that God doesn't need anything, He doesn't need our prayers, we pray for ourselves, then you would say your prayers, right? So it depends on who is interpreting that ayah. There are certain interpretations which are more common than others, but this does not mean that the others can be ruled out. So I wrote that book because I thought, how is it that they choose something like, attacks upon people, etc. I found that may be a valid interpretation also. So that we allowed by allowing people with those kind of, and they may be not only in, they are actually not so much in madaris, they are in other places. We allowed that to happen, and so we have to face the consequences.
So just stressing this final point, I mean, you're talking about, the long range costs of war,
Yeah.
intergenerational. It's not just in terms of body count, which in itself is, of course, a very grave measure of costs of war. But when we look at long range costs, we know that war is one of those big forces of transformation.
Yeah.
Pakistan seems to have a war on average maybe every decade or decade and a half, which is a huge statistic. And it seems that it kind of tests this hypothesis, which has perhaps been around for a while, and perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the hypothesis that says that having nuclear capability
Yeah.
does something to your decision making around war in a positive way doesn't seem to necessarily be working in Pakistan's case. Would you like to say a little bit about what may or may not have changed since the
जी
70s?
जी बिल्कुल Kargil, for instance. Kargil was one of those, there's one war in which the nuclear capability was there. Both countries had it. And yet Pakistan took the risk, or rather, four people took the risk, a clique, in which was the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army, the Chief of Army Staff, General Musharraf himself. He was part of this. He was the leader of this. They took the risk of initiating this war by going ahead and taking something like 10 to 15 kilometers of land which India considered their own. Okay. And they sat on those tops of hills, etc. Now, they took this risk, and it was because they said that India is not going to be stupid enough to attack us. So we can do this thing, and since we have nuclear weapons, India is not going to cross the border. Whereas, in fact, India, on the Indian side, there is evidence that they had even plans of crossing the border, if necessary. Why Pakistani soldiers suffered very much? And by the way, Indian officers and Pakistani officers over there have both commended each other's bravery, personal bravery. India has returned the bodies of Pakistani soldiers also. Okay, so all that has happened because Pakistan did not bring in the Air Force. India brought in its Air Force, they were acting in their own territory. So here are these people sitting on the roof here, and you bring in the Air Force, etc., battering them from the top, but they don't have an Air Force to protect them. So it was very tough for them. It is true that it was tough for the Indian soldiers also. They were climbing up the hill. But they also had an air cover. Pakistan did not have air cover. So it was much tougher for them. Secondly, the problem is, I don't know how many have seen that area. I haven't been actually there, but I've seen areas near it, that it's a mule track or a donkey track. So you go and assemble guns. First you take them on this mule, or donkey, and then you assemble it. That takes time. Whereas if you bring an Air Force, etc., it takes less time. It actually was very tough, and these people when General Musharraf said that they can hold on, that is not borne out by anyone else, including people who were there, whom I interviewed. They didn't say as much because they could only talk about their own sector, but they did say it was very tough. And Indians have given evidence that it was only the Pakistanis over there acted extremely bravely because it was very difficult to hold on. Right, so that is certainly there. It was a huge risk, and the nuclear risk was certainly there. I am quoting General Shahid in that. General Shahid was CGS at that time, but let me see. Actually, he says that we should have attacked Let me just see, yeah. It's in Urdu, but I have translated it myself. General Shahid Aziz. Our several posts had now been seized by the enemy, opposite to what General Musharraf had said. Others have also fallen, but had not yet been reported to the GHQ. According to the normal custom of lying, by the way, this is his language, not mine. Lying, false reports were generated. There was no counter plan to save more posts from falling. The morale of the troops had fallen. Now, to save the other posts from falling, there was only one way. Please listen attentively. That this war should be further expanded in some other areas of Kashmir so that the enemy should be forced to reduce his strength from Kargil. Even Musharraf didn't do this. But this is what he says. So, no fear of nuclear retaliation at all. And it's not a good thing to have no fear. Fear is something which makes us survive. Human beings should fear things which ought to be feared.
So one could add to the whole list that you've laid out for features of the military mind, Pakistani military mind, one of them being an irrational lack of fear as well.
Yeah, but
Perhaps.
see, there is it has to be a little nuance, little more nuance than that, because this war and all others, military officers themselves have criticized them much more than civilians. Civilians don't know enough. They've never been, I mean, authorized to criticize, so to speak. So it is not that in this Kargil war, Admiral Bukhari said, "What are we fighting for? Those mounts over there, Admiral Bukhari." And then the Navy wasn't even told about most of them. In 1965, the Air Force wasn't told to begin with. They were told later. And the naval chief wasn't informed. So it was in Kargil also. Some people were told according to what they said, if they have a right to, if they have a need to know basis. So that's why it's a clique. Even the whole military was not on board. So there it was. So military mind, in the whole general sense that yes, these wars were later on never criticized. In that sense, yes. And also in the sense that persons who are in charge somewhere, are part of that clique, they do show this kind of risk-taking behavior. In that sense, yes. But then there are people who criticize, or they're also from the military. So it has to be some more study of that, which is not easy because they don't give interviews and not everyone writes books, etc. And then everything you write in a book is to whitewash yourself. You don't say everything which ought to be said. I mean, General Niazi says that the GHQ has let us down, etc. They said they would send American forces would come and Chinese forces would come, this and that. Now, that might be true. Other officers have said that the whole idea of the defense of East Pakistan lies in West Pakistan was wrong because you just don't have the strength to attack in such strength that India would withdraw from there. Military officers have said that. A third one is that General Yahya's own idea when he attacked on the 3rd, 3rd of December, 1971. If he had waited just one more day, there was an Indian plan to attack on the 4th of December. Why it makes a difference? After all, the Indian army was present in what is now called Bangladesh, 20 kilometers inside, by the 22nd of November. They were there. The difference is that this was infantry mostly. And this was one of the reasons why it could be there is to silence the guns, intimidate, gunners, etc. Because you fire heavy guns for 20 kilometers inside. So, or just to harass, okay. Once the Air Force attack comes in, then it's a full-fledged war. Then you bring aeroplanes. And once on the 3rd of December when Pakistan attacked, from the 4th onwards, Dhaka airfield, etc., were battered by Indian Army planes. And an air commodore who was there, who gave me an interview, they said we just couldn't take off. Because what they did was the runway, they made runways ineffective. We just couldn't take off. So that is why certain actions based on certain philosophies like the defense of East Pakistan, rise in West Pakistan, etc., were wrong, and but even they were criticized by military officers. Okay.
So, just one last question before we go to the audience. I want to highlight the second component of what you referred to as an alternative history. So, there is this very elite, cliquish decision making
जी जी
component.
जी जी जी.
But then you also spoke about subaltern experiences and the bottom up experiences of common people who are encountering war. And of course, we can go into examples in the Q&A, but I was curious to know how you think these two components of alternative history, as you're describing it, how they are linked. Do you think that there is an interconnection between how this decision making for war happens and how the war is actually experienced on the ground?
Okay. Right. Oh, that this idea of using subaltern history, I got from a book which I read about the Soviet Union. When the women of the Soviet Union themselves enrolled into the army and fought against the Nazis. So there's a whole book on that. It's an excellent book, and the kind of heroism these women went through and the kind of experiences they went through, that is what set my mind to this idea that, there is the subaltern experience. Women, otherwise, as far as fighting is concerned, were considered subaltern. And here they were fighting and so on, and they were at the same time elevating their status in their own eyes, as well as other people, but in their own eyes. That's one. But the other main, experience, subaltern experience is to be voiceless. Their voice is not heard. Now, if you don't agree with the war, let's say, you can't be heard. No matter who you are, you will not be heard. So at that time, I've used the word situational subaltern for them. So if you do not act according to the norms of bravery and you're a military officer, but you have shown what is called cowardice in the face of the enemy, I mean, we are human beings, and so and this can happen to us, any of us, that we can be frightened. Any one of us can be frightened, terribly frightened. But then, not only others make you voiceless, you yourself become voiceless. You will not say that this happened to you. You will suffer in silence. And one has interviewed people in depression, etc. They've themselves written about it. They are not going to own up that they are cowards. And if they do, they can't face themselves in the mirror. So that is the subaltern experience. That's one of the subaltern experiences, the situational subaltern. Second is people, those who were accused of spying, beggars, just poor villagers who were just going from one place to another, beggars caught up, roughed up, etc. Sweepers, camp followers of the army, cooks, and so on. They are also subaltern. They're actually subaltern, and they don't even know what they're fighting for. So they're not much interested in the war itself. They don't understand it. I interviewed people who carried things in the Siachen area, etc. Porters, high altitude porters. And since I was interviewing them, they thought I expect them to praise wars in the army, etc., which they did. But then they would come up with कि हमारे गांव में इतने लोगों के हाथ कटे नहीं होते थे. अब स्कूल हैं लेकिन लोगों के पाँव कटे हुए हैं. Things like this. या फिर I went to someone's house और वो village में, and the women from inside they said कि ये मर्दों की जंग है, हमारे तो बच्चे मार गए. They were kept quiet, but that's what they said. So that part I've also looked at in this book. It just became very difficult because I've never I don't know how to do it. So it's not that I had money for it. वो savings के ऊपर book थी, तो उसी के ऊपर था. And the other thing is कि COVID came, and so even places where I could travel to, there also I couldn't travel there. So a lot of it was on the phone. But and then thirdly, it's very difficult to get interviews. especially from senior officers. Very difficult. Oh, just they don't do it. So there it was.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to hold back on more questions now, and I'm going to go over to you all to please address your questions to Dr. Rahman ji. Dr. Bari. Thank you.
डॉक्टर साहब एक ही सवाल के दो हिस्से. एक तो ये बताइए कि ये क्लीक की नेचर क्या है.
जी अच्छा
क्लीक की
हाँ
नेचर क्या है कि कौन लोग क्लीक के अंदर कौन बाहर, हाउ डज इट चेंज ओवर टाइम.
राइट
तो क्या एंड द अदर थिंग, आई मीन यू गिव द एग्जांपल वेयर इवन जनरल मूसा डिडंट नो
Yes.
and Ayub Khan forced him. So as if the commander in chief can be outside of the clique sometime as well, then the question becomes कि फिर इसका ये मतलब है कि एक breakaway unit या एक नॉन सेंट्रल यूनिट जो है वो वॉर शुरू करवा सकता है हमारे गोइंग अगेंस्ट द यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड कॉन्सेप्ट जो मुशर्रफ साहब बहुत बात किया करते थे.
Okay. Good idea. Okay. Very good question. Okay. The first clique is Mr. Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan. I'll just give you names, then I'll answer the question. Shaukat Hayat, Ghulam Muhammad, and then Colonel Akbar Khan, later on Major General Akbar Khan, Air Commodore Janjua, Brigadier Masood Khan, Satti, and so on. This is the first one. Now the second one is Ayub Khan, Major General Akhtar Malik, Mr. Bhutto, and Aziz Ahmed. Two civilians. Mr. Bhutto's role was that he said India is not going to cross the international border, and Aziz Khan was the secretary, and he was very much anti-India. So I mean, उनका कोई prominent role नहीं है, but that's what it is. Third clique, Yahya himself, General Hamid, General Umar, General Pirzada, General Gul Hassan, General Mehta. Fourth clique, General Musharraf, Aziz Khan, General Mahmood Ahmed, and Javed Hassan, Major General Javed Hassan. Afghan War पहली वाली General Zia himself, Akhtar Abdul Rahman, General Akhtar Abdul Rahman तो साथ थे, लेकिन basically यही थे. General Arif says he was consulted, लेकिन उन्होंने कहा कि मेरा ज़्यादा रोल नहीं था. तो मतलब फिर तो दो ही हुए. अच्छा, sixth के अंदर that means sending people, Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar वगैरह और लोग across the borders या helping them and something. ये तो इतनी plausible deniability है कि कोई चीज़ आप वसूख से नहीं कह सकते. But nevertheless, इसके अंदर तो ISI है, सीनियर मिलिट्री ऑफिसर्स हैं, लेकिन उनके नाम नहीं है. तो वन कैन नॉट से एनीथिंग. बस मतलब लिखा हुआ यही है कि लोगों ने अलग अलग कहा है कि जी वो हमारे घर ये हुआ वो हुआ और हमारे घर मिठाई आ गई और मुझसे इतनी भेजी थी, इस तरह की चीज़ें हैं. एंड समवन हैज सेड, पुलिस ऑफिसर खोसा, ही हैज सेड दैट they traced out the dinghy etc which were to Mumbai etc to a place in Karachi. तो यहाँ तक तो है, लेकिन no sure names are there. So these are the cliques. Now, whether it is possible to break away, that has actually not happened. In the first one, General Gracie was kept out. But he himself requested to fight. He requested, of course, the Prime Minister when Jhelum was in sight. When he said that the Indian troops can now see Jhelum, may I be allowed to use the Pakistan Army as Pakistan Army? And he was allowed. So that did happen, but that happened later. Earlier, General Gracie had said, this is not on. When he was ordered by Jinnah, the first thing he did was he rang the Supreme Commander, Field Marshal Sir Claude Auchinleck, who came next day, and Jinnah then withdrew his orders. So he did not disobey. Technically speaking, he did not disobey. He just said that he would take orders from, in addition to the Governor General, he would take orders from the Supreme Commander. So he did not disobey. Secondly, General Musa also did not disobey. He signed, he keeps saying all this, that I was not in favor of it and the army wasn't ready and all that, but he nevertheless signed the order which sent the army to war. And then he changed the command midway. It's not that he just sat back in the GHQ, didn't do anything. He changed the command from General Akhtar Malik to General Yahya. He did it actively and he did it personally. So it was that he was involved. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि यूनिटी ऑफ कमांड इन द टेक्निकल सेंस वो ख़त्म हो गया. मुशर्रफ तो खुद ही चीफ ऑफ आर्मी स्टाफ थे. मुशर्रफ शुड हैव टेकन ऑर्डर्स फ्रॉम ऑफ कोर्स द प्राइम मिनिस्टर. मुशर्रफ सेज ही टोल्ड हिम, whereas सताजीज whom I interviewed says कि नहीं बताया था. My own conclusion is कि जिस तरीके से बताया था वो ऐसा था कि किसी सिविलियन की शायद समझ में ना आया हो. I don't know. लेकिन जनरल मजीद मलिक थे वहाँ पे. He was not a civilian. वो शायद नहीं होंगे. I don't know, but I mean I'm told again and again बस सताजीज साहब के हमें नहीं बताया था. हमें बहुत बाद में बताया गया. So in that technical sense, this has not happened. But yes, it has been in a sense let's say a deviant faction, yes, or clique.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Amna Latif. Sir, fortunately or unfortunately, these are the time when we are witnessing ourselves, Ukraine and Gaza.
जी.
So, don't you think कि जो वार का elite phenomena है वो थोड़ी सी उसकी जो डायमेंशन है चेंज हो रही है in terms of that what I'm saying. आज सुबह बीबीसी ने ये खबर दी कि जो फंडिंग का बिल था यूक्रेन और इसराइल के लिए वो कांग्रेस ने अप्रूव नहीं किया. तो डोंट यू थिंक इट्स अ पब्लिक प्रेशर? नंबर एक पूछना मैं सिर्फ आपसे ये चाह रही थी, इंडिया ने कहा है अभी पाकिस्तान इज़ इररेलेवेंट फॉर अस, वो जैसे भी कहा. सो व्हाट यू थिंक कि जो वॉर ऑब्वियसली आपने कहा एक एलीट फिनोमेना है और एक एलीट कमांड का एक डिसीजन होता है एंड दे आर रूथलेस, दे आर फियरलेस, दे आर irrational and all that. So what do you think that in terms of this another perspective which you're talking about war, Pakistan-India war. So what do you think कि जो अभी सबाल्टर्न का प्रेशर है या लेमैन का है या जनरल इकोनॉमिक एक सिचुएशन है इंडिया के अंदर टू समहाउ, क्या वो अब आने वाले दिनों में पाकिस्तान में जो फियरलेस और इर्रेशनल जनरल हैं उनको कुछ उनकी स्ट्रैटेजी डिफरेंट होगी या यू थिंक इट विल रिपीट? नंबर एक, आई वांट टू अप्रिशिएट बिकॉज यू आर द ओनली आई गेस नॉन जनरल हु जस्ट राइट अबाउट वॉर हिस्ट्री एंड आई विल लव के अगर कोई हिस्ट्री, आई एम फ्रॉम हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी, आई एम डूइंग माई PhD. सो कि कोई स्टूडेंट्स के लिए भी आप कोई ऐसा गैप बताएं कि वो फियरलेसली काम कर सकें. थैंक यू सर.
थैंक यू वेरी मच इंडीड. देखिए, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल यूक्रेन और सेनेट की जो आपने अमेरिकन सेनेट की बात की, इफ़ यू लुक एट अमेरिकन हिस्ट्री दीज थिंग्स हैव हैपेंड वेरी ऑफन that funding has been denied for something etc. Temporarily, but there are lobbies. America is run by lobbies. So there's a war machinery in America which is probably war के point of view से अब worse या best जो जी चाहे कह ले, लेकिन it's an ever active one. तो उनके यहाँ ऐसा नहीं होगा कि वो war mongering बंद कर दें. उनकी war machinery बहुत बड़ी है and there are several books on military armaments, complex. That means armaments को sell करने को जो है ना, वो अमेरिका के जो ह्यूज कैपिटलिस्ट हैं उनके इंटरेस्ट में है. तो वो तो शायद प्रॉबली जितनी मर्जी वो डिनाई वगैरह की कुछ दिनों की बात हो, दैट विल प्रॉबली नॉट चेंज. ओके, एक तो उनका तो ये है. अच्छा, आपने ये देन यू टॉक्ड अबाउट पाकिस्तान इंडिया का. यस, इंडिया ने एक जंग शुरू की है, मतलब वो पाकिस्तान कट टू साइज वो तो की है ना 71, बट उसके अलावा भी एक जंग खुद इनिशिएट की, सियाचिन वाज नॉट इनिशिएटेड बाय पाकिस्तान एट ऑल. वो तो ये हुआ कि जनरल चिबर एक्चुअली केम फ्रॉम इंडिया एंड ही गेव दिस स्टेटमेंट इस्लामाबाद में. ही सेड वेरी क्लियरली कि वी रीच्ड देयर फर्स्ट. वो हुआ ये था कि इट हैड नॉट बीन डिवाइडेड. एवरीबडी थॉट हु इज गोइंग टू गो टू दोस स्नोई वेस्टलैंड्स. द ब्रिटिश डिड नॉट डिवाइड इट. फिर वो पाकिस्तानी और इंडियन मिले इन 1951 और सम सच डेट. उन्होंने भी कहा कि क्या ज़रूरत है इसको डिवाइड करने की, लेट्स हैव सम टी एंड कॉफ़ी यार, छोड़ो. उन्होंने भी नहीं किया. तो उसके बाद में ये हुआ कि देन दिस थिंग हैपेंड एंड जनरल चिबर रीच्ड देयर एंड इंडिया. बाय द वे, ये बिल्कुल एटिपिकल बात है. बेनज़ीर भुट्टो एंड राजीव गांधी हैड एक्चुअली एग्रीड ऑन पुलिंग आउट द ट्रूप्स. इंडिया सफरिंग मोर, दे हैड एग्रीड. लेकिन according to Indian sources, Indian generals, retired generals, did not allow it. Very strange for me, because one doesn't know how strong, how powerful the generals lobby is, but ये Indian source कह रहा है, मैं नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि उन्होंने नहीं करने दिया और आज तक नहीं करने दिया, despite the fact that they occupy higher ground and they are far more vulnerable to the storms and everything else. तो वो ज़्यादा लोग मरते हैं वहाँ पे और ख़र्चा भी बहुत ज़्यादा है, वो पाकिस्तान का भी है, उनका उससे भी ज़्यादा है. So it's not they are, this is one war. Probably one reason for that, which is not stated enough, of which I have no proof at all, is because unko China ko, you know, some kind of feeling, they want to send out this feeler that if India can occupy a height like this, तो चाइनीज भी अगर कोई करें कुछ तो हम जो हर जगह टेक ऑन कर सकते हैं, चुप करके तुम बैठे रहो. Some such thing. I don't know what it is. It's simply a hypothesis with no proof. Bahral, they have done that. Recently, a strange thing has happened. वो ये हुआ है कि पाकिस्तान में पुलवामा के बाद में कोई अटैक इंडिया पे नहीं हुआ. ठीक है, वो तो ऑब्वियसली यहीं के ट्रेस आउट सोर्स करते हैं, इवन इफ द सोर्स इज फ्रॉम देयर. वो कहते हैं यहाँ से इंस्पिरेशन थी वगैरह. सही है, ये गलत है, आई डोंट नो. नहीं हुआ. उसके अलावा मोदी गवर्नमेंट विच इज़ वेरी मच एंटी मुस्लिम, अदरवाइज एंटी क्रिश्चियन, ये सब कुछ है, बट दे स्टॉप द फायरिंग ऑन द फ्रंट. जनरल बाजवा और जितनी गलतियाँ हों, लेकिन ही वॉज इंस्ट्रूमेंटल इन सेंडिंग द इंडियन एयरफोर्स ऑफिसर बैक. Okay, so in fact, it is this Modi government, which is otherwise one could call it a fascist government. वो सब कुछ है, and strong government यहाँ भी है in a certain sense. लेकिन बहरहाल इन लोगों ने ये अमन रखा हुआ है वोटर्स के ऊपर. How long it will last, one does not know, because the basic equation and mindset on both sides have not changed, but better sense has prevailed. There were efforts to change this policy. General Musharraf, many people made those efforts. General Musharraf used to refuse. But somehow this has changed for the better, temporarily, but there it is. So whether there actually a sea change and it's a permanent change, that one doesn't know. Indian Navy is getting stronger. एंड द इंडियन, वो पाकिस्तान को जो कहा कि हमारे लिए नहीं रेलेवेंट, वो और किस्सा है. वो ये है कि इंडिया इज़ लुकिंग एट चाइना एज द पॉसिबल राइवल whom it can take on. To say that Pakistan is not relevant is an insult actually. तो वो इसलिए नहीं कहा कि जो अमन चाह रहे हैं, वो तो इसलिए था कि चलो थोड़ी सी इंसल्ट और कर दो. तो हमें तो मतलब तुम हो ही नहीं, तुम कहाँ लड़ने वड़ने वाले हम लोग. वही वाली बात है उसके अंदर. वो कुछ नहीं, इधर से rhetorical statement. Okay, but the Navy is getting stronger, much stronger than before, which means that the Indian, countries, what they say is that they are projecting their strength, military strength. So it used to be projected through the army. Now India has chosen the Navy also to project that strength. So ये ज़रूर हुआ है, which is not a good sign, but nevertheless that is what it is.
When we talk about the public perception and public memory of wars, 1961 and particularly the 71 one, in the oral history interviews that me and my team have conducted, we often find people go to such an extent that the nationalist and patriotic fervor was of such an extent that we enjoyed the 65 war, but it was very different in the 71 war.
Yeah.
Have you observed the same in your research as well, and if yes, why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's good question. Yes, in 1965 was very high. पाकिस्तान और इंडिया दोनों में था, by the way. इसलिए कि दोनों का परसेप्शन एक ही था कि we have been attacked, और ये जारहाना कार्रवाई दूसरी तरफ से हुई. तो यहाँ तो ये था भाई 6 सितंबर हम तो बैठे हुए थे आराम से, अटैक हुआ. Nobody knew about all these things which I have told you just now. मतलब ऑपरेशन जिब्राल्टर वगैरह, nobody knew about this. तो ये था कि यार हम पे ऐसे ही बैठे बैठे अटैक कर दिया. तो फरवर वाज वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग. इंडिया के भी ये था कि यार लुक एट देम, ये तो अखनूर पे हमला कर रहे थे, तो ये तो अखनूर तो इंडिया में है, क्या कर रहे थे ये जम्मू, उसके बाद तो अखनूर के बाद तो जम्मू है ना, तो व्हाट वर दे डूइंग. वो तो शुक्र है कि लाल बहादुर शास्त्री ने ऑर्डर दे दिया और ये हो गया वगैरह. सो दोनों जगह फरवर बहुत आया था. 71 की और बात, एक तो 71 में इट हैड बीन the civil war, the 271 wars, na? एक तो civil war थी, which started in March. That had been going on for a long time. तो expected तो था कि कुछ ना कुछ हो. Secondly, the Indian Army, as I just said, वो तो 20th तक तो 20 kilometers inside Bangladesh तो आ चुकी थी. तो यहाँ पे एक foreboding भी थी, although crush India signs were everywhere. लेकिन ये था कि याया खान is not starting it, ये कर नहीं रहे, and when they started, after that, the Air Force, which was sent first in, etc., air cover was not available in most places. So Pakistanis were disillusioned to the greatest extent. 22 cavalry के बहुत सारे tanks जो हैं वो air cover ना होने की वजह से खत्म हो गए. तो tanks were wiped out इसलिए कि वो तो sitting ducks हो गए ना. An Indian officer, a pilot officer who attacked it, he said कि they were sitting ducks. हम आते थे और करके चले जाते थे. Finally, we decided to turn back. I don't know whether he is right about that or not. लेकिन ये कि they knocked out those many tanks. तो fervor वाकई कम था because the air cover was not visible. Air cover was not visible for various reasons. I don't know whether they are true or not. One was कि पूरे western front was too huge. वो तो नीचे तक सिंध तक जा रहा था, इतना बड़ा था. उसके लिए एयर कवर शायद पॉसिबल नहीं होगा. और दूसरा ये था कि वो ढाका वगैरह में तो खैर एयरफील्ड ही डिस्ट्रॉय हो गए थे. थर्ड भी लोग कहते हैं कि सम एयर वाज बीइंग केप्ट बैक फॉर इमरजेंसी, बट अबाउट दैट आई हैव गॉट नो प्रूफ.
And of course, Dr. Saab is right in saying that, there was a many months long military occupation of one wing of your entire country itself. So I think that probably had a lot to do with the difference that you're seeing. So perhaps one more question and then there's tea and maybe the discussion can spill over. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such a fascinating talk. My question is, I'm Abdullah from Lok Sujak. My question is, has there been any episode in Pakistan history from resistance from the ranks of soldiers towards these decisions by generals in 71, in Gibraltar or in Kargil? Like, these are very mad and sort of very arrogant decisions. So has there been any episode of resistance by the soldier rank? And also, if there isn't, what is the reason that we have rarely seen people coming out against these decisions by the generals from the soldier rank?
There have been. 1971, after the defeat in 1971, there was a very well known, actually, because many people have written about it, like conference, let's call it, in the GHQ, in which Yahya Khan and General Hamid were actually verbally attacked. तो बिल्कुल हुआ था. And that was one reason why Bhutto found it very easy to replace Yahya and to appoint, someone else, General Gul Hassan instead. Actually, General Gul Hassan was also CGS, लेकिन उनको appoint कर दिया गया. भुट्टो के वो हामी भी थे वगैरह. So this has happened. FP Ali, Brigadier FP Ali also, उनका भी है कि वो भी खिलाफ थे और खासी फौज जो थी उनके सपोर्ट में थी. So incidents ऐसे हुए हैं. फिर एक other incidents are also there. कारगिल के ऊपर, and one officer has written over here, I've quoted him in this book. उन्होंने कहा कि soon after that, they said GHQ में officers थे, whether it was an informal tea or otherwise, but they did say कि जी अगर आपने withdraw ही करना था और ये सब करना था तो फिर ये शुरू ही क्यों किया था. And these are obviously junior officers. मतलब इतने junior तो नहीं होंगे, middle ranking, but nevertheless they confronted their seniors. तो हुआ तो है. It not before it happened, but after it happened certainly. अच्छा, बिफोर वाले के अंदर भी यूँ है कि बिफोर वाले में जैसे मिठा सेज कि मेरे पास प्लान आता तो मैं कहता कि नहीं. इसी तरह जनरल ज़िया सेज दैट, जनरल ज़िया के somebody else has written, उनके आगे भी प्लान आया था कि भाई इस तरह करो और कारगिल वाला. तो he said, okay, gentlemen, so you made a plan to cut Pakistan into two, because if they take Sindh, that's all right. उन्होंने कहा, see, we haven't really planned for that. उसने कहा, thank you, gentlemen. So you have planned to get Pakistan into two. उनका तो यही तरीका था बोलने का. तो वो भी हुआ है. तो मतलब इवन सीनियर लेवल्स के ऊपर ऐसे प्लान्स को कहा गया कि गलत है. बेनज़ीर के सामने पेश किया गया, बेनज़ीर ऑल्सो रिफ्यूज्ड इट. तो ऐसा नहीं कि कोई किसी ने नहीं कहा, हुआ है. लेकिन यस, perhaps nothing has been strong enough to stop the thing before it happened. After it happened, yes, लेकिन before it happened नहीं. 65 के अंदर अलबत्ता everyone was deceived to such an extent that I have never read anyone saying कि कुछ गलत हुआ, except for one thing. Everyone in the army and elsewhere has said कि why was the command changed from General Akhtar Malik to General Yahya Khan. ये तो सबने कहा, ये क्वेश्चन सबने पूछा है. It was crucial क्योंकि वो तो मैंने बताया ना, अखनूर was not defended. अगर वो if the Pakistan army had not 24 घंटे ना गुजरते तो अखनूर might have fallen. My own perception is that if it had, the war would not have stopped. Because India would not obviously have allowed that. जंग तो उसी तरह ही होती बल्कि उससे ज़्यादा लोग मरते. तो मेरे ख्याल में तो कोई ख़ास फ़ायदा नहीं था. लेकिन पाकिस्तानी को अक्सर यही लगता है कि अगर ये कमांड नहीं चेंज होती तो शायद ये होता. और अब मेरे ख्याल में, पहले मुझे नहीं पता था, आफ्टर डूइंग दिस रिसर्च आई फील दैट इन दिस पाकिस्तानी इज़ द राइट. वाकई होता, बिकॉज अखनूर वाज नॉट डिफेंडेड. लुक्स वेरी स्टूपिड बट दैट्स व्हाट द इंडियन जनरल सेज कि नहीं था डिफेंडेड उस वक्त. वो तो हमने फौरन जल्दी जल्दी फिर फोर्सेस रश किए. तो
Thank you so much. And on that note, let's have a round of applause. Thank you so much.
thank you.